Welcome everyone to DerekJ Speaks, and today we are doing a very special movie review edition, and the movie we are talking about is quite possibly the biggest movie in the world right now, and what will be a safe bet that will be the biggest movie of the year, that being Spider-Man No Way Home, the 27th film in the lineup of the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and the third film to round out the MCU Spider-Man trilogy. Of course, the first film being Spider-Man Homecoming, and the second film being Spider-Man Far From Home. So, the movie just got released in theaters as of this recording a few days ago. So I'm sure by now all of you have seen the film. I'm sure some of you have probably seen it multiple times by now and have already gone all over the internet looking at different reviews and different analyses and think pieces, all of the sort. So I thank you for tuning in here, and we are doing a big dive into this film, and we are going into spoiler territory. So if you have not seen this movie, first of all, what have you been doing? And second of all, please go watch it. Go see it for yourself. Go experience this film as it should be experienced, which is in its full entirety, full on, with fresh eyes and a fresh open mind. So please, if you haven't seen it already, go out and see it. But I assume you have seen it, or else you wouldn't be listening to the spoiler review. But I implore anyone to go see it. And even if you have already seen it, yes, go see it again, because it is that great of a movie. I have been a huge fan of Spider-Man since I was a little kid. I read some of the comics, I watched all the cartoons, any that aired on TV, any tapes of cartoons from the 70s, 80s, whatever decade you want to go back to. And of course, I have seen every single movie. I'm pretty sure, whether rightly or wrongly, every single theatrically released Spider-Man film I saw in the theater. So this was a very special occasion for me here to see this very highly anticipated film on the big screen. So we will get into all of that, as much of it as I can. This isn't going to be some deep analysis of the film, breakdown scene by scene type thing. It's just, I'm here chilling with you guys, just kind of going through some of the things that I can reminisce and recollect on from this crazy movie. There is just far too much to unpack for me to do all of it justice. So I will just go through a lot of the things that come to mind right off the top of my head, and a lot of the thoughts and opinions and feelings that I have coming out of the movie, what they gave us and what it is setting up for the future, and what this all means for the legacy of the Spider-Man franchise in general. Of course, that being a very special place in my heart, because Spider-Man is such a special character for me in all forms of medium, whether it be film, TV, video games, whatever. Spider-Man is a very special character to me, and so seeing a film like this do that character justice in such a fantastic way was an incredible moment. So we're gonna get into all that, but do some house cleaning first. If you're new here, or if you are a returning listener of this channel, if you like what you see, if you like what you hear, go ahead, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and subscribe to this channel right now, DerekJ Speaks. If you want to hear any more thoughts and opinions that I have in my personal time, follow me on Twitter at DerekJ Speaks, where I talk all kinds of things in this crazy world, specifically predominantly professional wrestling, that being WWE, AEW and anything else. And of course, right here on the channel, I have several reviews of AEW, all the sorts, all the like, and now incorporating film. So, really excited about that. Really fun opportunities here coming up. So, with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into this. As I mentioned, this is definitely a spoiler review. I'm not going to get the whole breakdown of what the film's about. I think you can kind of surmise what the film is about based on the trailers and based on the synopsis of the film. Basically, Spider-Man messed up in a big way. So, where we last left off with these characters in the previous film, that being Far From Home, we now know that the entire world knows Spider-Man's identity, that being Peter Parker. Not only that, but he has been accused of the murder of Mysterio. So now he is a war criminal. That whole story of him being accused of murder and being this war criminal in front of the public, it kind of gets wrapped up fairly quickly in the beginning of the movie. Within the first 10 or 15 minutes, it's pretty much done for, and we get that a character to the MCU, that being Matt Murdock, played by Charlie Cox, of course, the star of the Daredevil series on Netflix, ran for 3 seasons and was loosely connected to the MCU until Kevin Feige and the entire Marvel crew just decided to not give 2 shits about the Marvel characters on Netflix. But we did get confirmation recently that if we should see the Daredevil character again in the MCU, he will be played by Charlie Cox. So it was good to see him pop up. You got a little spatter of applause from the theater, at least my theater, when his face popped up on the screen. I just thought it was really cool to see him. And he comes in, he's just the lawyer right now. He's just a very good lawyer, as he called himself. And he even had a really cool moment for him to kind of showcase what he's capable of. You have, of course, the public opinion of Peter Parker, Spider-Man, is very negative. And so, of course, you have people throwing bricks into his apartment and all that. So we have a scene where Matt Murdock is with Peter in the apartment of him and Aunt May, and Happy Hogan is there, and someone throws a brick into the window, and without even seeing it, without even batting an eye, Matt Murdock catches the brick and says, "I'm a really good lawyer." So just a little quick glimpse of exactly what this character can do. And that was the only scene we saw of him. So a nice little Easter egg and a little bit of fan service, of course, but it will be interesting to see what they do with this character in the future. And that is just scratching the surface of the insanity that continues to arise in this film. Of course, all the trailers and all the promotion heading into this film focused on Spider-Man trying to plead with Doctor Strange to cast some sort of spell that will make everyone forget he is Spider-Man and make all of this craziness go away. Of course, Peter, being the immature kid that he is, does not fully comprehend what it is he is asking for. The spell gets messed up, and out of it, we have a situation where everyone who knows who Spider-Man is all converges into this one universe. Everyone from across different universes comes in to this one singular universe who knows the identity of Spider-Man. Now, it was not every single person, obviously. They clarified that. Doctor Strange mentioned that it was only a few squeak through, but it was a very particular set of few. Of course, we had Doc Ock, Dr. Octopus, played by Alfred Molina from Spider-Man. Return of Jamie Foxx as Electro, from Man 2. And we had, of course, the best performance in the entire film, Willem Dafoe as the Green Goblin. Now, the very first Spider-Man film, all the way back from 2002, Tobey Maguire, still holds a very special place in my heart as being one of my favorite Spider-Man movies. There have been far better that have come out in recent years, but that was the first one. Saw it when I was young, so it still holds a special place in my heart. And of course, Willem Dafoe was the Green Goblin in that film, so seeing him and his greatness shine in that film, and now all these several years later, you have an entirely brand new generation who gets to come to a Spider-Man movie and see Willem Dafoe just chew up every bit of scenery he is on in No Way Home. He was the main antagonist of all the villains who comes in. They try to do a little fake out that little second side of him, that goblin side of him, gets hidden away and kind of gets buried, but it's still there, and when it comes out in full force. So had a lot of fun seeing him be so passionate and dedicated to this role, a role that he was so gung-ho about portraying all those years later and was very passionate about returning to, so much so that he insisted on doing his own stunts and just really committing himself to this role. And that is just all the more respect in the world for the talent and ability of Willem Dafoe to transform himself into any kind of role that suits him best in any film. And of course, the Green Goblin and Spider-Man is no exception. That is not to discredit the other villains in this movie. We had Jamie Foxx as Electro, not portraying the character the same way he did in the Amazing Spider-Man 2, that being the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man films. He was allowed to show a lot more of his own personality, that being Jamie Foxx, of course. A lot of that personality of himself shined through a lot more in this role than it did in the Amazing Spider-Man. And they also explain that, transforming or transferring over into a new universe and changing up a little bit. So I thought that was very clever on their part. And of the main three, he was my least favorite, but I still thought that he did a fairly good job. And of course, Alfred Molina, a talented, trained actor, as is everyone here, but just a master of his trade, and he brought it as Doc Ock all those years earlier in Spider-Man 2. So it was obviously a thrill to see him still portray that role to perfection here. We see him go through a bit of an arc in this film. Of course, the big thing with this film is that all of these villains come from these different worlds, and Doctor Strange is trying to get them back to their universes as soon as possible to fix and clean up this mess that is all Peter's fault, essentially. And unfortunately, a lot of these villains, of course, the Sandman from Spider-Man 3 is also one of the villains. The Lizard from the first Amazing Spider-Man film is another character in this film. Those two, you can take them or leave them. They don't have a big impact on the story. They do feel like they're just kind of there, but it is still good to see them just in the context of this film. But they all meet different fates in their own distinct universes. So Doctor Strange, no problem sending them back to be dealt with however they need to be. But of course, Peter Parker, being the very helpful, heroic figure that he is supposed to be, is not trying to send all these guys to their immediate deaths. A lot of them do die when they go back to their own separate universes. So He's not trying to do that. He would like to help them. He would like to basically fix them and try to make them good and help them in any way he can, which leads to a difference of opinion between Spider-Man and Doctor Strange, and that leads to a very badass fight sequence between Peter and Doctor Strange in the mirror dimension. The trailers show a bit of it, but it does not get the entire scope of the scene. It is very brilliantly executed, and the visuals are just phenomenal to look at. It is unlike anything we have seen in a Spider-Man movie before. We've seen it in other Avengers movies, and of course the first Doctor Strange movie, so it's not anything brand new, but in the context of seeing it within a Spider-Man movie, it was a really cool addition. And that was another thing about the film. It was during this entire sequence that Spider-Man manages to outsmart Doctor Strange with the power of math. He manages to get Doctor Strange tied up and chained up in the Grand Canyon, at which point we do not see Doctor Strange for a large chunk of the movie going forward. So, made sense. I'm sure a lot of people were not thrilled to see Doctor Strange basically disposed of for a large portion of the movie, but it was a means to an end, and it did make sense, and for the purpose of having the focus remain around the character of Spider-Man, particularly Tom Holland, Peter Parker, Spider-Man, because everything that happens in this movie revolves around him. That is one of the biggest positives I can say about this film, is that everything revolves solely around this Peter Parker, this character here, and he is really put through the ringer, which is par for the course when it comes to Spider-Man. Many of us know that the Spider-Man character essentially cannot be happy, for at least not for too long. He is constantly facing all kinds of bullshit and life just taking a big dump on him all the time, and he just has to push through and fight through it and overcome it and still keep and stay true to his responsibility, his job, his role as Spider-Man, and the duties that he must take with it and the sacrifices that have to be made along the way. And I thought that that was on full display in this film, which is not something that we have seen from this version of Spider-Man, this MCU version of Spider-Man, up to this point. So now when you see this film and knowing where we came from with the previous two, it makes them even better. And it makes this trilogy a lot stronger than many of us probably initially thought it was. At least I can speak for myself and say that I do. I look at this now upon seeing this film and looking back at the entire series of Spider-Man films within the MCU, you can look at it as one giant origin story. You know, we see the Spider-Man origin story, of course, bitten by the spider, gains these powers, loses his Uncle Ben, and with great power comes great responsibility, takes on the role of Spider-Man. Boom, there you go. With the absence of an Uncle Ben dying here and not seeing Peter get bitten by the spider, we've just basically been along for the ride of seeing Spider-Man go on these different missions, his own missions, being thrusted in with the Avengers and doing all of these crazy things that it's cool to see. I enjoy seeing, but at the same time, there is a certain brevity and weight to the character of Spider-Man that is lost almost, that we do not really get a sense of until this film. This is where the stakes become higher. This is where the intensity rises, and this is where actual drama comes into play. And I thought Tom Holland, who plays Spider-Man tremendously in all of these films, stepped up his game big time in this one. There was a lot more character development and growth that was needed of the character in this film to really take control of things. And I thought that he brought it to life as best as he possibly could and gave the best performance I've ever seen from him in any of these Spider-Man films. So, with that said, of course, the biggest thing in this movie, there's a lot of big things that happen in this movie, but perhaps none bigger than the appearance of other Spider-Men. Of course, the scene where we see the arrival of Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man and Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man. Of course, you get their villains. It only makes sense that their Spider-Man would appear as well. So the entire last act of this film revolves around 3 different Spider-Men fighting off all of these villains, working together, interacting with one another, bouncing off each other, riffing with each other, and it was great to see. As I mentioned, Tobey Maguire, that was my first Spider-Man. People always have, that's my Batman, whether it's Michael Keaton or Val Kilmer, Christian Bale, whoever it is, Ben Affleck. They associate different, and I know all the Batman, the animated series fans out there are going to tell me about that. But yes, you have your own different versions of Batman. We also have our own different versions of Spider-Man, and he is the one that I equate to my childhood the most, since I grew up with him and I grew up with those 3 films. Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man and the Amazing Spider-Man films, not a fan of those movies, particularly the second one. Strongly dislike that one, but I always had an appreciation and respect for Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man. I always thought that he was perfect for the role, even less so as Peter Parker and more so as Spider-Man himself. Which is funny because I always thought that Tobey Maguire, while a good Spider-Man, made for a great Peter Parker. So I always thought that was a great aspect of both Garfield and Maguire, and I thought that that played a big role in this film because I thought that both men gave some of the best performances as Spider-Man that they ever did. In some cases, they gave better performances as Spider-Man in this film than they did in their own Spider-Man films. Mainly Andrew Garfield in that category. I thought that he did a phenomenal job of not only bringing the same kind of dry wit and humor from his films and having that kind of piece of his personality and character shine through, but also some of the pain and hurt that he has experienced as Spider-Man. Of course, this is a Spider-Man who was years removed from the tragedy that befell him at the end of The Amazing Spider-Man 2, where he tragically lost Gwen Stacy, and he blames himself. So this is a much more bitter and angry and even depressed in many ways version of this Spider-Man, who he mentions that there's this great scene at the rooftop of the high school where Peter, who just suffered his own loss, suffered the loss of Aunt May, and that too is another excellent scene. Of course, it's very tragic to see Aunt May pass away, the brilliantly talented Marissa Tomei as Aunt May, who also gave her best performance as that character in this film. We see the repertoire, we see the rapport, I guess, between her and Tom Holland's Peter Parker so much stronger in this film, and I thought that they did a great job of transferring that heart and soul of the Uncle Ben Parker character into Aunt May in this film. So much so that when she does die, you do feel that they earn that death, and the way that Marissa Tomei plays it, and of course the way that Tom Holland acts, the entire acting of that death scene was stellar. It was perfect. So when we see Tom Holland's Peter Parker at his lowest point on the top of the roof at the high school, and we see Ned, and we him and comforting him. And then we see these other Spider-Men come in, of course, Toby and Andrew, comforting him and giving him advice and basically telling them we've been there. It is great to see Andrew Garfield, express that anger, that angry side of him. And of course, Tobey Maguire telling him about his own scenario where he did track down the person who killed his Uncle Ben, saw him die, and it accomplished nothing. So you have these different two ideologies, these two different experiences coming on to Tom Holland Spider-Man, and it's just a very wonderful scene, and it is probably my favorite scene in the entire movie, even more so than seeing the three of them fighting together and seeing that big shot from the trailer that was clearly edited when the trailer came out, and as you could tell, it was edited here, so that was really cool. But yes, the drama and the dialogue between these three characters was amazing. And we did have a lot of really cute, funny, humorous bits between all three of them. Different points. We had Andrew Garfield Spider-Man cracking Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man's back. We had a pretty lengthy bit of dialogue about Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man shooting webs from his wrist. Meanwhile, Andrew Garfield and of course Tom Holland's Peter Parker's Spider-Man have web shooters. So I thought that was pretty cool. The climax is Spider-Man having to sacrifice everything to save the universe, essentially. He has to make it so that no one remembers that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, and in fact, no one remembers Peter Parker at all. He's basically wiped from existence entirely. That includes wiping the memories of Ned, his best friend, and MJ, his girlfriend. It's very sad. It is very sad to see, but it is also very excellent in terms of knowing the Spider-Man character and knowing the sacrifices that he must make to remain true to himself as this great, upstanding hero. And I thought that they did a great job of showing the emotion of what the ramifications are of this decision. I thought that his last interaction with MJ and Ned was brilliant. They have had tremendous chemistry in all of the movies up to this point, and it really shined the brightest here, particularly the interactions with Peter and MJ in this film. Their relationship and the way they play off of each other is just great. So after this, we see Peter Parker, interact with MJ and Ned, mainly MJ more so than Ned, trying to remind them, trying to tell them, hey, I'm Peter Parker, I'm Spider-Man, we do this. But through that, we see Peter come to the realization that Ned and MJ, their lives are still good. They got into the college they wanted to get into, I believe it was MIT. And so their lives are just fine as they are without him. And so he pulls the ultimate sacrifice of letting them go. He moves on to his own little life. He finds a little dingy apartment. He's going to get his GED. He designed his own new costume, which is far more comic book accurate than any Spider-Man costume up to this point in any film. And I thought, well, damn, that's Spider-Man. That is him, trying to help others in any way he can. And I just thought that was a great ending. I won't get into the credits. Of course, the post credits was just a big trailer for Doctor Strange, The Multiverse of Madness. Very much so looking forward to that film. Comes out next year. And the mid credits has something to do with Venom, which really did not make much sense. So I'm sure far more educated can talk about that than me, but was not a fan of it. But overall, Spider-Man No Way Home was perfect for me. It is highly ranked as one of my favorite Spider-Man films. a close spot right behind Into the Spider-Verse. But man, this was a great movie. I cannot give it enough praise. 20 years of Spider-Man films, all culminating to this one moment. Years, decades of history and lore and homage to this amazing, wonderful character. Seeing it all play out the way it did on the big screen in such a grand, epic fashion was a sight to behold. And like I mentioned at the top of this video, even if you did already see this movie in theaters, which you just cannot understate how important it is to see a film like this in a theater, in a packed theater, so many people going crazy, losing their minds, cheering, clapping, screaming, crying, whatever the emotion that they need to bring out in any particular moment. They did it in my theater. I'm sure for a lot of you in your theaters, and that also adds to the experience as well. So everything about this movie was just great. I definitely plan on watching it several times. The rewatchability of this movie is second to none, and it makes for a lot of fun to watch the entire trilogy from Homecoming to Far From Home to No Way Home, and seeing all three of them together and looking at it through the lens of it being one giant origin story. Because more so than the previous two movies, you definitely see Tom Holland's Peter Parker come out of this film truly being Spider-Man, not Iron Boy Jr., not Spider-Boy or some underling or just some teenager, some dumb kid. You definitely see him grow into becoming truly Spider-Man. And I thought that was a lot of fun to see. And I look forward to seeing Tom Holland go in the direction that they're taking with this character now in the next trilogy that they're going to do. It's already been confirmed. We are getting a Spider-Man 4. When, where, what it's about, who knows? But based on the actions of this film, I'm definitely looking forward to it. So, thank you for listening to me ramble on about some silly comic book movie. And again, all of you, I'm sure you've seen it. Hit me up in the comments here. Comment down below. What did you like about this movie? What did you love about this movie? What did you hate about this movie? And of course, subscribe to the channel, like this video. DerekJ Speaks. Follow me on Twitter. I probably still talking about Spider-Man today, and I will probably be talking about it throughout the rest of the year, as well as other things that come to my mind. So thank you all, and enjoy Spider-Man No Way Home.